It was a Thursday night, late. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, half listening to the sound of Emily's shower running in the bathroom. We'd had a quiet dinner, barely said a word to each other, but that wasn't unusual anymore. We'd been in this strange, disconnected rhythm for months, maybe even years. What grabbed my attention that night wasn't some deep conversation or a fight over something petty. No, it was a notification. Not mine. Hers. Emily's phone buzzed on the nightstand next to me. Now, I'm not the kind of guy to go through someone's phone. I trusted her, or I thought I did. But when it buzzed again and again, I couldn't help but glance over. Her screen lit up, and there it was, "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible." The world stopped. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at that message. I felt my mouth go dry, my hands clenched into fists. My wife was in the shower, and some asshole was texting her about last night. I knew what it meant. You don't need a translator for something like that. In that moment, I felt like everything I'd ever known had been a lie. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, unable to process the reality of what I was seeing. My mind raced, trying to come up with some explanation, any explanation that didn't lead to the obvious conclusion. But there was no mistake. I read it again. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible." My throat tightened as I sat up in bed, listening to the sound of the water running in the bathroom. I could hear Emily humming lightly, completely oblivious to the bomb that had just gone off in my head. I had two choices: pretend I didn't see it and let this whole thing play out behind my back, or confront it head on. The thought of acting like nothing had changed sickened me. But what was I supposed to do? Storm into the bathroom and start screaming like some maniac? My mind was spinning out of control, but I knew one thing: there was no going back from this. I grabbed her phone. The screen was still lit up, the message sitting there like an accusation. I tapped the notification, and it opened up to a string of messages. There it was, all of it. She wasn't just having some innocent conversation. They were graphic, detailed messages. It wasn't just some guy flirting. They'd been meeting up repeatedly. My stomach churned as I scrolled, reading their little exchanges about what they'd done, how much they missed each other, what they were going to do next time. This wasn't a one-time thing. It had been going on for months. I could feel my pulse in my ears, drowning out the sound of the shower. How long had this been happening? How many nights had she come home, acting normal, when in reality she was with someone else? I felt a sharp pain in my chest as the realization hit me. This wasn't some mistake or misunderstanding. She was cheating on me. My wife, the woman I trusted for over a decade, had been lying to my face while crawling into bed with someone else. I wanted to throw her phone across the room, smash it into pieces. But that wouldn't solve anything. I needed proof. Proof of what I already knew. My hands were shaking, but I managed to snap a few pictures of the messages on my own phone. My mind was still reeling, but I knew I needed to keep my head clear. If I didn't handle this right, she'd just deny it, twist things around, and make me out to be the crazy one. I wasn't giving her that chance. As the shower shut off, I put her phone back on the nightstand and sat there, staring at the wall. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard the bathroom door open. Emily walked out, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping. She smiled at me, a casual, everyday smile that had once made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. Now, it made me feel sick. "Hey, you're still awake," she said, acting like nothing was wrong. I forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep." She sat down at the edge of the bed, towel still wrapped around her. "I'm exhausted. It's been a long day." She picked up her phone, the same phone I'd just seen full of evidence of her betrayal, and set it aside like it was nothing. No guilt. No hesitation. "Yeah," I muttered. "Long day." My mind was racing. I couldn't just confront her right then. I needed to figure out how to approach this, how to get through the next few hours without losing my mind. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream at her, to throw those messages in her face, but I knew better than that. I needed time to think. To plan. I'm going to bed, she said, yawning. She leaned over to give me a quick kiss on the cheek before sliding under the covers. That was the worst part. The normalcy of it all. She acted like everything was fine, like we were still the same couple, sharing the same bed. But nothing was the same. Nothing would ever be the same again. I waited until she was asleep before slipping out of bed. My heart was still racing as I went downstairs to the living room, trying to wrap my head around everything I'd just discovered. How had this even happened? We'd been together for almost 15 years. We had kids, a house, a life. And now, it felt like I didn't know her at all. I sat there in the dark, staring at my phone, flipping through the pictures of her messages with this other guy. His name was Alex. I didn't recognize it, but it didn't matter. I'd learned more than I ever wanted to know about him from their texts. He worked with her, apparently. They met up after work, sometimes during lunch breaks. I clenched my jaw as I read through one message where she told him she couldn't wait to see him again, how she wished she could spend more time with him but had to be careful because the husband was getting suspicious. The husband. That's all I was to her now. Just an obstacle in her way. I couldn't sleep. There was no way I was getting any rest that night. I thought about calling someone, my brother, a friend, anyone, but what was I supposed to say? How do you even start that conversation? Hey, turns out my wife's been screwing some guy from work for months now. Just thought you should know. I could barely wrap my own head around it. How was I supposed to explain it to someone else? By the time morning rolled around, I still hadn't slept. Emily came downstairs, acting completely normal, oblivious to the fact that I knew everything. She made coffee, kissed me goodbye before heading to work, the same place where she'd been sneaking off with him. I watched her leave, my hands clenched into fists, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as she was gone, I pulled out my phone again. I needed to know more. I needed to see if this had just been some temporary thing or if it was something bigger. There had to be more evidence. I didn't want to, but I went through her social media, her emails, even her location history on Google Maps. It was all there. Every lie, every deception, every betrayal. She hadn't just been with him a few times. She'd been seeing him for months. They had this whole other relationship behind my back, like a second life I knew nothing about. And the worst part? Everyone else knew. There were messages from her friends, talking about him, making jokes about how she was living a double life. They all knew about the affair, and not one of them thought to say anything to me. I wasn't just betrayed by her, I was a joke to everyone around her. That's when the anger set in. I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. How could she do this to me? How could she lie to my face every day, come home and pretend like everything was fine? She didn't even have the decency to feel guilty about it. She was living her life, doing whatever the hell she wanted, and I was just some idiot sitting at home, none the wiser. I couldn't sit there anymore, doing nothing. I grabbed my car keys and left the house. I didn't know where I was going at first, just driving around aimlessly, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her right away, show up at her office, throw those messages in her face and make a scene. But I wasn't thinking straight, and I knew it. I needed to cool down, to think rationally before I did something I couldn't take back. After what felt like hours of driving around in circles, I finally pulled into a parking lot and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. But I knew one thing, this wasn't going to end quietly. By the time I got home, I had replayed the conversation in my head 100 different ways. I imagined shouting, breaking things, getting in her face, making her admit to everything she'd been hiding. I imagined her breaking down in tears, begging for forgiveness, or worse, just standing there, cold and indifferent, like none of it mattered. Whatever way it went, I knew this was going to be ugly. I sat in the living room, staring at the clock, watching the minutes tick by. She'd be home from work soon. Normally, I'd be cooking dinner, maybe watching TV, something to pass the time. But now, all I could do was sit and stew in the rage that had been building since last night. I was done pretending. Done playing the part of the clueless husband. When I heard her car pull into the driveway, my heart started pounding. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't afford to show any weakness. This was the moment I'd been waiting for all day. She walked through the door, carrying groceries, her face lighting up with that same smile she always gave me, as if nothing was wrong. As if she hadn't been sneaking around behind my back. "Hey," she said casually, putting the bags on the counter. "I picked up some stuff for dinner. I thought we could." "We need to talk," I cut her off, my voice steady but hard. She froze, turning to look at me. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion. "What's wrong?" I stood up, grabbing my phone from the coffee table. "I know, Emily. I know about Alex." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. It was like she was trying to process what I just said, scrambling for an excuse, a way to talk herself out of the mess she'd made. But there was no getting out of this. "What are you talking about?" she finally said, her voice shaky. She was trying to play dumb, but I wasn't falling for it. I walked over to her, holding up my phone. "I went through your messages. I saw everything. All those texts, all those meetups, all the times you lied to me." I could feel the anger bubbling up again, my voice getting louder with every word. "You've been cheating on me for months, and you thought I'd never find out." She stared at me, her eyes wide. For a moment, I thought she might actually deny it, try to twist things around. But then her face crumpled, and she let out a shaky breath. I can explain." "Explain?" I snapped. "Explain what?" "How you've been screwing some guy from work behind my back. How you've been lying to me for months." She looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't care. I wasn't in the mood for her tears. She didn't get to cry now, not after everything she'd done. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, really?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Then how was it supposed to be, Emily? Was this all part of your plan? You get to have your little fling on the side while I sit at home like a fool, none the wiser?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "No, it's not like that. It just happened. I never meant to hurt you." I laughed, but it wasn't out of amusement. It was a bitter, angry laugh, one that came from deep inside, from a place of complete disbelief. "It just happened? You just accidentally fell into bed with him?" She looked down at the floor, wiping at her eyes. "I'm sorry." "Sorry?" I sat down at the kitchen table, the image of his smug face burned into my mind from those text messages. The way he talked to her, like he was doing her a favor by being with her, like he was something special. He was nothing. Just another guy thinking he could mess with someone else's life without any consequences. Well, I was going to make sure that wasn't the case. I pulled out my phone and started going through the texts again. His name, his number, his work schedule all right there. He didn't bother hiding anything. Why would he? He thought he was untouchable. He thought he could do this without ever facing the fallout. He'd been stupid enough to use his real name, real phone, even real work hours in their chats. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it. First, I wanted to find out more about him, get a sense of who I was dealing with. I started with his social media. It wasn't hard to find. His profile was public, full of pictures of him at bars with friends, vacations, posing with expensive cars, like he was someone important. The more I scrolled, the more disgusted I became. He wasn't just messing around with my wife. He was proud of the life he was living without a care in the world. And that pissed me off even more. Scrolling further, I found what I was looking for, his workplace. He worked at some tech startup, one of those places where they brag about having company culture with ping pong tables and craft beer on tap. Great. That gave me options. I could contact his employer directly, like I did with Emily's, but that seemed too easy. I needed something more personal. I needed him to feel this like I had. I spent the rest of the evening gathering information. His work address, his boss's name, even the HR contact. I was meticulous, going through every public record, every post he'd ever made, making sure I had everything I needed. Then, once I felt like I had enough, I put my plan into motion. The next morning, I drove to his office. I didn't barge in or make a scene. I wanted this to be subtle, to catch him off guard. His office was in one of those sleek, modern buildings downtown, glass walls and steel everywhere. I parked across the street, watching as people filtered in and out. It wasn't long before I spotted him. He strutted out of a coffee shop nearby, a grin on his face like he didn't have a care in the world. I followed him as he walked into the building. I dressed the part, wearing business casual so I wouldn't stick out. Once inside, I made my way to the front desk, acting as calm and collected as possible. "Hey, I'm here to see Alex," I said, flashing a friendly smile at the receptionist. She gave me a polite nod, checking her computer. "Alex? Do you have an appointment with him?" "No, but it's a personal matter," I said smoothly. "I just need a few minutes of his time." She hesitated but eventually picked up the phone. "Let me just call in for you." I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me was wondering if this was the right move, but it was too late for second thoughts now. I was committed. After a moment, she nodded and pointed me toward the elevator. "He's on the 4th floor. He'll meet you in the lobby." I thanked her and headed to the elevator, trying to keep my breathing steady. I wasn't nervous, I was pissed. And the more I thought about it, the more that anger pushed me forward. When I stepped out of the elevator, there he was. Alex. Standing there in his designer shirt, his fancy watch, looking like he didn't have a worry in the world. When he saw me, his face twisted into confusion. He didn't recognize me. Of course, he wouldn't. Why would he bother to know the face of the husband whose life he'd been helping destroy? "Hey, man," he said, walking up to me with that smug smile plastered on his face. "Do I know you?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I'm Ryan," I said flatly. "Emily's husband." His smile dropped in an instant. "Oh. Oh?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "That's all you've got?" "Oh." He took a step back, glancing around like he was checking if anyone else was nearby. "Look, man, I didn't." "You didn't what?" I interrupted, taking a step closer. "Didn't know she was married? Didn't care? Which one is it?" He held up his hands defensively. "I didn't mean for things to get out of hand, alright? It wasn't supposed to be serious." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Not supposed to be serious? You've been screwing my wife for months, and you think it's not serious? You think you can just walk away from this?" He opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't let him. I stepped in closer, getting right in his face. "You ruined my marriage," I said, my voice low but full of fury. "You walked into my life, destroyed everything, and you don't even have the balls to own up to it?" He swallowed hard, glancing around again, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." "You didn't mean to cause trouble?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You're screwing another man's wife, and you think it's no big deal? You think you can just apologize and it's all good?" "I'm sorry, okay," he said again, his voice shaky now. "I didn't know it was going to be like this. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." I stared at him, my fists clenched at my sides. Part of me wanted to hit him, to wipe that pathetic look off his face. But I didn't. I had something better in mind. "You're going to lose everything," I said quietly, my voice steady now. "You think this is over? You think you can just apologize and walk away? You're wrong. I'm going to ruin you." He blinked, clearly not understanding what I meant. "What are you talking about?" "I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you are," I said, stepping back and crossing my arms. "Your boss, your coworkers, your friends. Everyone's going to know you're a piece of shit who sleeps with married women." His face went pale. Wait, what? I've got the messages, I continued, cutting him off. Every single text between you and Emily. I've got all the proof I need to destroy you. And believe me, I will. He opened his mouth to argue, but I could see the panic setting in. He knew I wasn't bluffing. Look, man, let's not. Let's not what? I said coldly. Let's not ruin your life? The way you ruined mine? He was sweating now, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for an escape. But there was no way out of this for him. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice desperate now. I'll do anything, okay? Just, please don't do this. I stared at him for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air. It's too late, I said finally. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, his face as white as a sheet. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew I'd already won. By the time I got back to my car, my phone buzzed. It was an email notification. I smiled as I opened it, reading the response from Alex's HR department. I had sent them the texts earlier that morning, along with a detailed explanation of his relationship with Emily. Their response was brief but clear: they were launching an internal investigation into his conduct. It wouldn't be long before he was out of a job. I sat back in the driver's seat, taking a deep breath. It wasn't over yet, but I had started the ball rolling. Alex's life was about to fall apart, just like mine had. And that was enough for now. I hadn't seen Emily since the day I locked her out. Part of me wondered where she was staying, if she had run to Alex's arms after I kicked her out, or if she was holed up somewhere alone, reflecting on everything that had happened. But in truth, I didn't care. I was done with her. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The problem was, you can't erase 15 years of marriage overnight. As much as I hated her for what she'd done, there was still a knot in my stomach whenever I thought about how everything was falling apart. The house was too quiet without her, the kids were staying with my parents, and I found myself sitting alone in the evenings with nothing but my thoughts for company. I hadn't spoken to Emily, not directly, since I kicked her out. She had tried texting me a few times, tried calling, leaving messages full of apologies and explanations. I ignored them all. It wasn't like there was anything she could say that would change the way I felt. She didn't deserve my time or my attention. But Tom, my lawyer, kept reminding me that we had to talk eventually. We had to figure out what was going to happen next, especially with the kids. Divorce wasn't something you could just ignore, no matter how much I wanted to cut her off and leave her in the past. There were legalities to handle. Property to divide. Custody arrangements to figure out. I wasn't ready to deal with all of that yet, but it had to happen. The sooner we had the conversation, the sooner I could move on. So, I sent her a message. We need to talk. Come by the house tomorrow at 4 p.m. Don't be late. That was it. Short and to the point. No pleasantries, no emotion. I didn't want to give her the impression that I was open to anything more than a cold, hard conversation about the logistics of ending our marriage. We were past apologies. We were past explanations. This was business now. The next day, I sat in the living room, waiting. I was calm, at least on the surface, but there was a tension running through me, an underlying current of anger that I couldn't shake. I kept telling myself that I was ready for this, that I was prepared to handle whatever she threw at me, but part of me knew that seeing her again, face to face, was going to stir up all the emotions I'd been trying to suppress. The doorbell rang at exactly 4 p.m. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the door, not moving. It was strange, knowing she was on the other side, waiting. We'd been married for so long, and now she was just a stranger I barely recognized. Finally, I stood up and walked to the door. I opened it, and there she was, Emily, standing on the porch, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red, her face pale, and there was a weariness in her expression that I hadn't seen before. "Hi," she said softly, her voice barely audible. I didn't respond. I just stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. She hesitated for a second, like she wasn't sure if she should, but then she walked past me, her head down, avoiding eye contact. I closed the door behind her and followed her into the living room. She sat down on the couch, and I stayed standing, arms crossed. I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to get comfortable. This wasn't a social visit. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable, until finally, Emily spoke. "Ryan," she said quietly, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." I didn't respond. I just stared at her, waiting for her to continue. Sorry didn't mean anything to me anymore. I had heard it too many times, in too many messages, and it had lost all weight. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers nervously. "I know I've said it before, but I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry for everything. For lying to you. For cheating. For ruining everything." I kept my arms crossed, my voice cold and steady. "Why now, Emily? Why are you saying all of this now?" She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Because I realize what I've done. I've been thinking about it, every day, every minute since you found out. I've been replaying everything in my head, wondering how I let it get this far, and I don't have an answer. I don't know why I did it. I wish I could go back and change everything, but I can't." "You wish you could change things," I repeated, my voice hard. "What exactly would you change, Emily? The part where you lied to me for months? The part where you were sleeping with someone else and acting like nothing was wrong?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even deserve to ask for forgiveness. But I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was confused, I was lost, and I made a terrible mistake." "A mistake," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "Is that what you're calling it? A mistake?" "I don't know what else to call it," she whispered. "I don't have an excuse." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to keep my emotions in check. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to unleash all the anger and pain I had been holding inside, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. She was right. There was no excuse. No explanation that could justify what she had done. "We need to talk about the kids," I said finally, steering the conversation away from her apologies. I didn't want to hear any more of it. "We need to figure out custody, and we need to figure it out now." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I know. I've been thinking about that, too. I want what's best for them." "I don't want them to know what happened," I said, my voice firm. "Not yet, at least. They're still too young to understand all of this. They don't need to know the details." "I agree," she said quickly. "I don't want them to be hurt any more than they already are. I'll do whatever it takes to make this as easy as possible for them." We talked logistics. Custody schedules, school drop-offs, holidays. It was surreal, sitting there discussing the dismantling of our family like it was some business transaction. But that's what it had become. There was no love left between us, no warmth. Just cold practicality. At one point, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "Is there any chance? Any chance at all, that we could work through this? That we could find a way to move forward?" I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Move forward? Are you serious? After everything you've done, you think we could just move forward?" "I don't mean it like that," she said quickly, her voice shaky. "I know it wouldn't be easy. I know it would take time. But I love you, Ryan. I've always loved you. I made a mistake, but I still love you." "Stop saying that," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "You don't get to say that anymore. You don't get to throw those words around like they mean something after everything you've done." She flinched at the harshness of my words, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to soften the blow. Not this time. "I don't love you anymore, Emily," I said, my voice cold and final. "Whatever we had, it's gone. You killed it. There's no going back. There's no moving forward. We're done. She looked like I had slapped her, her face crumpling as fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. But we've been together for so long. We've been through so much. Are you really going to throw all of that away? I'm not throwing anything away, I said flatly. You did. You threw it all away the moment you decided to betray me. She didn't say anything after that. She just sat there, crying softly into her hands, while I stood there, feeling nothing but numbness. This was what it had come to: 15 years of marriage reduced to a few broken apologies and a room full of silence. After a long stretch of quiet, I finally spoke again. I'll be filing for divorce next week. Tom's handling everything. We'll go through mediation for the kids, but there's nothing else to talk about. This is over. She nodded, sniffling as she wiped her tears. Okay. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. I walked to the door and opened it, waiting for her to leave. She stood up slowly, glancing at me one last time before walking out. I'm sorry, she whispered again, her voice barely audible as she stepped through the door. I didn't respond. I just closed the door behind her and stood there in the empty house, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading away. When the door finally closed behind Emily, I felt an emptiness settle over me. It was done, or at least, it was as done as it could be for now. I had made my decision, laid it out for her, and there was no turning back. The divorce was moving forward, and I knew this was the right call. But knowing something is right doesn't always make it easier. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the blank space in front of me, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. It felt like a blur, like my life had gone from something solid and predictable to this tangled mess of emotions, betrayal, and anger. And now, sitting here, with the quiet stretching around me like a suffocating fog, I couldn't help but wonder what was next. Not just for me, but for my kids, for our family, for the life I'd spent so many years building, only to watch it fall apart in a matter of days. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. I had a message from Tom, my lawyer. Just a confirmation of what we talked about earlier: the divorce papers were being drawn up, and I could sign them as soon as next week. I swiped the message away, not really wanting to deal with it right now. I knew it was coming, but seeing it written out like that made it feel more real than I was ready for. I thought about the kids. How was I going to tell them? My parents were watching them for now, and I knew they were safe, but this conversation was inevitable. I had managed to keep them in the dark so far, but I couldn't protect them from this forever. Eventually, they'd know. They'd have to deal with the fact that their mom and dad were splitting up. And not just splitting up in the worst way possible. I thought about the look on their faces when they found out, about the questions they'd ask, about how they'd try to make sense of it all. Kids don't understand affairs, betrayal, or broken marriages. They see the world in black and white: mom and dad are together, or they're not. That was it. And soon, they'd be living in two separate homes, with two separate lives, bouncing back and forth between a family that used to be whole. I rubbed my hands over my face, feeling the weight of it all settle into my bones. I wasn't sure how to navigate any of this. I had never imagined I'd be here, getting a divorce, dealing with the aftermath of my wife's affair, trying to figure out how to keep my kids' lives stable while everything else fell apart. I had spent years working hard to give them a life I never had growing up, and now I was the one tearing it all to pieces. It wasn't my fault. I knew that. But it didn't stop me from feeling like I'd failed them somehow. I thought about Emily's face as she left earlier. Broken. Full of regret. But it was too late for regret. She had made her choice. She had chosen to be with Alex, to lie to me, to destroy our marriage for the thrill of some affair. And now she was left to pick up the pieces of the mess she'd made. A small part of me wondered what her life would look like from here. Would she try to make things work with Alex? Would she try to move on with someone else? It didn't matter. I had washed my hands of her. What she did now was none of my business. I wasn't going to waste any more of my energy thinking about her, wondering what she was doing, or feeling any sympathy for the position she'd put herself in. She'd earned whatever consequences came her way. As for Alex, I knew his time was coming. I had sent the proof to his workplace, and Tom had confirmed that an internal investigation had started. He was already on thin ice. It was only a matter of time before he lost his job. And when he did, I wouldn't feel a shred of pity. He wasn't just some random guy who had fallen into an affair. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew Emily was married. He knew about me, about our family, and he still went ahead and helped destroy it. If anyone deserved to pay for this, it was him. And I wasn't done yet. There was still more to do. More ways to make sure Alex felt the consequences of what he'd done. Tom had suggested I could pursue legal action, not just against Emily, but against Alex as well. Alienation of affection, they called it. It was rare, but it was possible. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go down that road just yet, but knowing I had that option gave me some comfort. If he thought he was going to walk away from this unscathed, he was dead wrong. But in the end, all the revenge in the world wasn't going to change what had happened. It wouldn't bring my marriage back. It wouldn't give my kids their parents back under the same roof. Revenge would only take me so far. After that, I'd still be sitting in this empty house, trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life. I stood up and wandered into the kitchen, my mind still racing. The house felt hollow without Emily in it. I had boxed up her things, thrown away anything that reminded me of her, but the memories were still here, lingering in the air, in the walls. This was the house we had bought together, the place where we had raised our kids, celebrated holidays, argued over stupid things, laughed, made up. It was full of years of history, years of us. Now, it felt like it belonged to someone else. A stranger. Or maybe that stranger was me. I poured myself a drink and sat back down at the table. The divorce wasn't finalized yet, but I knew it would be soon. And once it was, what then? What did my life look like after this? After 15 years of marriage, of being part of something, of building a life with someone, what did you do when all of that was gone? I didn't have the answer. Not yet. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let this destroy me. Emily had taken enough from me already. She had taken my trust, my marriage, my sense of stability, but she wasn't going to take my future. I was still here. Still standing. And as hard as it was going to be, as painful as it would be to move on, I was going to do it. Not just for me, but for the kids. They deserved better. They deserved a father who wasn't bitter, who wasn't broken by what had happened. So I made a decision, sitting there at that kitchen table, staring at the empty space across from me where Emily used to sit. I was going to move on. I didn't know how yet, or what that would look like, but I was going to rebuild. I had to. The first step was letting go. Letting go of the anger, the need for revenge, the bitterness that had taken hold of me since I found out about the affair. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't something I could do overnight. But I had to start somewhere. I couldn't let this define me for the rest of my life. I took another sip of my drink and stood up, feeling a strange sense of clarity settle over me. I was going to survive this. I didn't know how long it would take, but I was going to come out the other side stronger, for me and for the kids. I grabbed my phone and sent a quick text to Tom. Let's finalize the divorce as soon as possible. It was time to end this chapter. Time to move forward. As I walked through the house, I realized I wasn't afraid of what was next. It would be hard, sure. It would be painful. But I wasn't going to let the past hold me back anymore. Emily had made her choices, and I had made mine. Now it was time to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I grabbed the last of her boxes and walked them out to the garage, stacking them in a corner. She could come pick them up whenever she wanted, but they were no longer my concern. As I stood there in the garage, looking at the stack of boxes, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't the same man I had been before all of this happened. I wasn't naive anymore, and I wasn't going to let anyone take advantage of me again. I was ready for whatever came next. Ready to take control of my life again. Ready to move forward, with or without her. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace.